All right. Shalom, everybody. I guess I get to do the introduction today. It's wonderful to see you all. Today is Sunday, October 29th. I'm glad we can be together today. Today is part three of this three-part commemoration that we've been having for the 30th anniversary of the Kavod Tzedakah Fund. And I just want to recap. The last 2 weeks that we've had together have been really unbelievable and extraordinary. The first week when we were together, we had the opportunity not just to hear from Yoshi about the history of Kavod, but Rabbi Susan Lippy, who is with us, interviewed Chris Wade of the Other Ones Foundation, talking about this incredible work that they were doing with people experiencing homelessness in and around Austin, Texas. And last week, I'm still my breath is still taken away by what we did last week when we had the opportunity to hear from Rabbi Edgar Nof in Haifa, and then our Kavod board member, Jay Moses, interviewed Dr. Beth Weinstein from Weinstock from Birdie Light, doing their work on the front lines of fentanyl advocacy and education with young people throughout America. It was really a pretty extraordinary program that we had. And for me, this was the essence of what Kavod is all about: promoting decency, dignity, the honor of human beings made in the image of God. Today is going to be another incredibly intense hour that we're going to have together, because just to give you a sense of where we're going today, we're going to have the opportunity to hear from Yoshi, who is in Tel Aviv, on the front lines of working with some of Kavod's mitzvah heroes and doing incredible volunteer work himself and distributing tzedakah on our behalf. Then Yoshi's going to be in conversation with Jonathan Orenstein, who's on the call, who's at JCC Krakow, who's been on the front lines of work with Ukrainian refugees since that war began. And we have the opportunity to learn Torah with Rabbi David Ellenson, our teacher, our friend, Kavod board member, past president of Hebrew Union College. And start everything off today, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce my friend, Rabbi Sydney Mintz, who is the rabbi at Congregation Emmanuel in San Francisco. Who's going to lead us with some spiritual intention for this moment. So, Sid, pleasure to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. What a huge kavod, literally it is, to be in such great company and to be together, really b'yachad, during this difficult time. And, I love that we're so connected through time and space, and yet we have to acknowledge that there's great brokenness, and these shards and edges are impacting all of our hearts wherever we are. So I want to, of course, thank Yoshi for being the Minahel, for really being the director and the founder of such an incredible organization that it's hard to believe, since we're only 30 years old, that Kavod is 30 years old. And that it started in the place where you are right now, Yoshi. It started in Jerusalem. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to just I'm going to give us a few minutes to just, wherever we are, sink into the sense of quiet that we haven't had probably for many weeks, and just to give us an opportunity to meditate together. So if you, wherever you are, feel comfortable in your seat, that would be a great place to start. And I'm going to invite you to just do a little bit of a scan of where you are physically. You could keep your camera on or turn it off, and just get to feel your tuchus or whatever is on the ground, and scan from, the top of your head, the crown of your head, all the way down. And if there's anything between the crown of your head and your feet that feels tense or intense, just to notice that. Breathe a little bit into whether it's morning for you, afternoon or evening, breathing into your body, into that place of breath and of quiet, not to silence what's going on outside of you, but just to focus on what is keeping us all here, which is our breath. And I'm going to invite you just together, everybody, to take 3 deep breaths in and out of your nostrils, from your nose, in and out. And to take deeply into your heart these words from our sacred Psalms about not just the physical space of Yerushalayim, but the heart space of Yerushalayim. We learn Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkach yamini. That we never forget Jerusalem. We don't forget the place. We don't forget the inspiration and the aspiration for shalom and shalem. And we feel deeply in our breath and in our hearts. And I want us to take us into one more minute of silence by through the guidance of the last words of Adon Olam. Beyado afkid ruchi be'et ishan va'ira, be'im ruchi gaviati, Adonai li velo ira. Into the hands of Hashem, into God's hands, I trust my entire spirit when I'm sleeping, when I'm awake, and if my spirit or when my spirit leaves me, God is with me. I shall not be afraid. We take this last minute just to center ourselves, prepare for the wisdom, the chokhmah that will light up our lives today. Let me take these last 3 breaths together. Opening our eyes, thinking about what our own personal and communal kavanah is during this fragile time, this vulnerable time, this time that we are still striving for wholeness. We open our eyes and we come back together. Toda Rabbah.
Thank you so much, Sydney. I don't want to speak for anyone else. I'll just say, for me, I needed those breaths. So thank you. Welcome, everybody. It's so great to see so many friends and supporters of Kavod. And just a reminder that we'd love to have everybody, if you haven't already done so, go to kavod.org and make a donation in honor of our study. If you'd like to direct the donation to emergency relief in Israel, I'm here in Israel for the next 3 days, and I'll be distributing tzedakah, some to our longtime mitzvah heroes that we've been in relationship with. I'm actually going to get to see the person who spoke to us last week, Rabbi Edgar Nof. I'm going to see him on Tuesday. But there's lots of tremendous need right now, just tremendous. So any tzedakah that you want to send through Kavod, I'll make sure to distribute it for you. And I just wanted to share, Neil had said, it'd be nice to get a little bit of an update. The shirt I'm wearing, I got when I was outside of the United Nations just a few days ago, because I was on my way from Los Angeles, spent a few days in LA. I was supposed to be at a conference, and we canceled the conference and just did part of it on Zoom. But I came to New York anyway because I wanted to see my daughters. And when I was there, I got to go to a rally outside of the United Nations. And it was pretty powerful because one of our friends from Jerusalem, many of you have seen Rachel Goldberg and John Pollan on the news. Rachel, they were on the cover of Time magazine last week, And when I was, I'll show you a picture. So I'm going to go back and forth to my, so this photo here is actually right outside, across the street from the United Nations. And that's John and that's Rachel. And there were about 1,500 people outside there to support them as they walked by. It was really, really powerful. And when Jacqueline and the girls and I were living in Jerusalem, Jacqueline and Rachel met one day, just kind of walking on the street, and became fast friends. And we kind of fell out of touch over the last 5 or 6 years. But during our time there and for a few years after, we actually spent a lot of time together. And their son Hirsch, who's been kidnapped and we hope is alive and will be rescued soon or returned somehow, ended up being at our daughter's bat mitzvah. So it was really meaningful to see them there. And if you haven't heard Rachel speak, you probably have, because she's all over Facebook and Instagram. And like I said, the cover of the New York Times. And then the next day, I flew to Israel. I got here on Friday. And one of the great things about getting back here was getting a chance to see a lot of friends. And it was really, really wonderful. It's also been very powerful because I'll show you one more picture. One of the things that happened on my way is a variety of different people reached out to me and said, well, if you're going to Israel, will you bring supplies? And you probably in your home communities have been hearing about people saying, yeah, the soldiers of the IDF need supplies. And what I am here to tell you is that is true. I've spoken to a lot of reservists, and today I got to meet with people who are deeply involved in the efforts to make sure that not just the evacuees, but soldiers are getting the materials that they need. And it seems rather shocking. Here's when getting on the plane at JFK, I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bags of material for Tzahal, and the packing lists were sent to us by people who know what was needed. But again, rather shocking that the materials aren't ready. One person today explained to me, look, when you call up 300,000 soldiers, you don't have enough supplies. And one thing that's been really beautiful is that you're not seeing a lot of Israelis, at least so far in the 3 or 4 days I've been here, 3 days I've been here, I'm not hearing a lot of Israelis wanting to talk and just blame. But a little bit of that is coming out. And one of the questions I said, because I was talking to my friend who said, how could the IDF ever imagine that they would need to call up everybody? And I said, hold on, like, I'm not a military person, but I could imagine that you'd have to call up everybody. You've got Hezbollah in the north, and you've got Hamas in the south, and you've got Iran not too far away. Like, why wouldn't you need to call up everybody? So who's ever to blame for it, there really are not enough supplies for all of the reservists, and it's a real problem. And so it was amazing to see people bringing together their ingenuity and just trying to make things happen. So when I kept getting passed off to another person every step of the way, and when I finally got to the other side of customs, and that's a story I won't tell you, but it was incredibly frustrating, because instead of welcoming people who are bringing materials in with open arms, customs was actually giving people a really hard time. So it took me an hour and a half to get through customs, and they made me pay a tax to bring supplies to Israeli soldiers who are not being given adequate supplies by the very government that was taxing me. So it was pretty astonishing. But anyway, this guy, Jonathan, and his little daughter, Yaeli, was on the other side waiting for me. And we were like transferring everything, getting them into the various bags. And so 3 of the bags went to Jonathan and Yaeli. I always say hello to Ben Gurion on my way out. And I could only imagine what he would have said about what happened to me at customs. But then when I got to the other side, this is Michael and Yulia, and they were helping to pick up another package. And in that package, this was kind of bizarre. Someone reached out to me through my niece and said, I heard you're coming to Israel. Can you bring some ceramic plates for me? to Israel. And I thought that was a strange request. Why on earth would someone need you to bring ceramic plates to Israel? But then I learned that ceramic plates are a type of body armor. So then it made sense. Got it. Okay. So they're very heavy. And there's a company in Michigan that makes plates that are certified by the Department of Defense, because they actually make plates for the United States Army. So I had 12 of these plates. And when you wear body armor, I've learned a lot about this now. You wear one plate on the front and one plate on the back. And I know I have a lot of Hebrew speakers here. Do you know how you say the vest that they wear? Do you know how you say that in Hebrew?
Ephod.
It's called an ephod. Yeah. Pretty cool. So for those of you who've studied a little bit about the vestments of the high priest, he wore an ephod. And so they were telling me, they said, you know, one guy today told me, he said, "Aval anachnu zkukim mamash le'efodim." And I was like, I was trying to make sense of I thought it was like some kind of acronym, FOD, I don't know. Finally, I was like, oh, ephod, got it. So anyway, I got those plates in. It was not easy. But what I discovered a little bit later is that there's a great need for that. So I got to spend Shabbat with some dear friends. And I will say, at a moment like this, being here, the number of Israelis who just kind of threw their arms around me and started to cry because I had come was astonishing, and beautiful and moving and powerful. But just, you know, oh my gosh, I can't believe, you know, you're here. And
is it okay this way?
The truth is, it was an easy trip, and I feel quite safe. And even though there's been a lot of Tseva Adom, you know, the alerts going off, thank goodness I haven't had to go in a bomb shelter. I mean, it's though it's a country at war right now, here in Tel Aviv and where I was in Jerusalem felt quite safe. I got to visit my dear friend and Kavod supporter, Rabbi Leon Wiener Dow, whose father just died about a week and a half ago. And I got to make it for the last few hours of Shiva at his house. And then I had Shabbat with Rabbi Susan Silverman and Yossi Abramovitz, which was really powerful. And at dinner, if you've ever, I'm sure a lot of people here have had a Shabbat dinner with them, they always have this amazing collection of folks. And so they had a young woman who was raised in Hong Kong, made Aliyah, and served in intelligence. And she came back for Miluim. She was called up, and she got her Tzav Shmona Esrei, which I guess is, you know, the order to come up for reserve duty.
Just 1 second, I'll be right back.
And she flew in from, yeah, Neil, maybe you can mute everybody else just so we don't get any outside noise.
Yeah, should I say Sukharov or Sucherov?
Okay. Yeah, if ever.
So there you go.
Okay,
One sec. Okay, can we hear you, Yoshi?
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks,
good.
everyone. Okay. So she was telling her story of how she came back, and she couldn't tell me what she does in the Army, nor could she tell me where she was going. But she told me for the first 10 days she was here, they had to move almost every night. And sometimes they were in a building, sometimes they were in a tent. But she's attached to a lochmim, you know, a fighting combat soldiers. And then I got to go to Kol HaNeshama, and it was wonderful to see Rabbi Levi Kelman, who has had all sorts of terrible health issues, but thank God he's doing great. He's feeling great. And yesterday he gave an incredible drash. Those of you who know Levi will love this. It was a drash that Abraham Joshua Heschel was supposed to deliver at Levi's sister's bat mitzvah, but Heschel got sick and he couldn't deliver the drasha. And so then in the course of his introduction, Levi mentioned about 9 other, Gedolei Hador. And finally, he said, so when Abraham Joshua Heschel couldn't deliver the sermon, he asked Elie Wiesel if he'd do it in his stead. So I yelled out, Levi, drop some more names. And got a good laugh. So that was fun. But Levi shared the drash that Heschel gave on Parashat Lech Lecha. And it was very beautiful and very appropriate for this moment, because he talked about that tension between our universal impulses to try to just open our hearts to the world and our obligation to take care of ourselves at the same time. And then today, and I'll wrap up with this, I had one of the most incredible Israel experiences of my life, and I lived here for 5 years, so that is saying a lot. I got to go to the Hamal in Tel Aviv. Hamal is Rashi Tevot for Cheder Milchama, and traditionally it would mean like a war room, like the war cabinet would sit in Cheder Milchama, but they've actually created a Cheder Milchama Ezrachi, the Hamal Ezrachi, and they're all over the country. The biggest one is in Tel Aviv, but there are multiple ones in Tel Aviv. There's multiple in Jerusalem, and every city in Israel has created a Hamal. And the same group of people that organized the protests against the prime minister, Achim Laneshek, Brothers in Arms, and then they became Achim V'Achayot Laneshek. They realized we should probably include our sisters in arms. They pivoted right after the war started, and they are now the ones organizing relief efforts. And the kind of general rule there is also people weren't talking about the government and people weren't complaining about the situation. They were just doing the work. So I'll show you just a little bit. When you drive up, people are just dropping off. You can see strollers and boxes and just tremendous amounts. Then we wandered into like the senior staff meeting, and I just came in and sat down and listened to the last like 10 minutes of the briefing. And everybody in the room is a volunteer, but a lot of high-tech people, a lot of people in business. That's my tour guide, Jeff Winston, who's helping. I spent the first hour making boxes, which was actually really fun and kind of meditative. And then I'll just show you real quick. Okay, this is all of the items that people are bringing to give away. It says, here's food for babies, different size, diapers, toiletries, look what it says here. Kulanu Achim. So it goes on if you want. I posted that to Facebook, but you can watch the rest of the video. But then the most amazing thing happened was I walked over to this table that said Siyud lechayalim, material for the soldiers. And I came over and I said, look, I have a bunch of batteries. I was told to bring in those little chargers that you use on your cell phone. And I realized that people going into Gaza, into tunnels, going underground, would need to figure out ways to keep their electronics charged because they need those for communications, and headlamps. I had those things. But then I asked them about the body armor, and that got someone's attention because they're badly in need of body armor. So they said, oh, we're going to connect you with this guy, Rafi. So then I went back outside because that was all underneath this big garage. I went outside and I found Rafi, and I told him about this whole story about the body armor. And he was like, we've figured out a way to source 40,000 sets of body armor. You should know that one set of body armor costs about $500. So millions of dollars of body armor, civilians in Israel purchased, figured out a way to get to Israel and distribute to people who need it. Because again, remember, 300,000 people got called up. A lot of them didn't have body armor. So then they said they need 8,000 more sets. So then I spent the rest of the afternoon talking to the person who'd given me the body armor in the first place, making connections. And it was just inspiring, unbelievably inspiring to see Am Yisrael working together and trying to make a difference. So I'm sorry I went longer than I was supposed to, and Jonathan, my apologies, but it was just an incredible day. If you want to support any of these projects, you can make a donation to Kavod, and I'll direct it. And if you want to support Brothers and Sisters in Arms, I'll put that in the chat room. So thank you, everybody, and thanks, Neil, for the opportunity. I'm really, really happy to have my friend, and a lot of you know him, Jonathan Orenstein, here with me today. I first got to meet Jonathan on a visit to Krakow years ago, and it feels like about a million years ago, Jonathan. And I was just blown away with the work that they were doing in Krakow. And somehow he convinced my entire family to come back and ride bicycles from Auschwitz to Krakow, which was so meaningful on the one hand. On the other hand, when you say, hey, kids, family vacation, we're going to Auschwitz and we're going to take a bike ride. And the kids said yes. And we raised money for the JCC of Krakow. And so inspired by that experience. And then in the wake of Russia's war on Ukraine, Jonathan and his team at the Krakow JCC immediately stepped in and started bringing refugees in, and have done just incredibly inspiring work over the last year. And now they're helping Israelis who've been stranded in Poland. So first, I just wanted to say thank you, Jonathan, and kol hakavod. And I'd love to hear updates from you on your work with refugees from Ukraine, and also some of the work you've been doing more recently. And I should also note that Jonathan is an Israeli citizen and was in the IDF himself. And so if you want to comment on any of those things, please.
Sure. Thank you, Yoshi. It's good to be here with you, everybody. I appreciate the support of Kavod and all that you do. I'm aware of your good work for many years, and we in Krakow appreciate the support. Yeah, it's very difficult to focus on anything or to even have a mind space for anything besides what's going on in Israel these days. I think for all of us, but our work in Krakow goes on. One that's trying to rebuild Jewish life, reach out to lost Jews who are disconnected from the Jewish world because of the Holocaust, and we see them really as secondary victims of the Holocaust, not those who were in the camps or who were killed, but those who were cut off from their own identity. So we're, ever mindful, ever searching to try to do all we can to try to bring those people back in and try to push the needle a little bit in the other direction after the Holocaust, and that's still going on. And with Ukraine, we very mindful of our own history, just understanding that that 6 million number, the loss was so great, I think primarily because of indifference. And had the world done more, and that includes all of Europe, it includes the United States, everybody, then we wouldn't have the loss wouldn't have been as great as it was. So when the war started, with that in mind, we decided we were going to do all we can for Ukraine, and we decided that we were going to help Jews and non-Jews equally. We didn't really know what that meant. We were not a humanitarian aid agency. We're a JCC, although a JCC without a gym and without a swimming pool. So hard to give us full JCC accreditation by United States standards, but we try. So we had to figure out pretty quickly what to do. But we had intent, and we had friends around the world, and we opened a food kitchen, a food pantry in the building. We set up projects inside Ukraine, on the border. Dozens of projects, became almost like a mini federation. And at this point, we're still 20 months in, housing and feeding about 600 to 700 Ukrainian refugees a day. It's primarily women and children. And to date, we've helped over 250,000 Ukrainian refugees, 98% of whom are not Jewish. And we've raised and spent $10 million supporting Ukraine, which is 5 times our annual budget. So that continues. It's been a challenge logistically, and of course, from a fundraising point of view, we generally raise our entire budget overseas in the US. So just it's never an easy model for us. But we think, and it sounds silly to say it, that it's the right thing to do. And also, particularly we have a particular responsibility because not only of our Jewish history, but because of the history of our community, that, we go to work every day, my team, and are trying to rebuild Jewish life because of the Holocaust. And we have to be mindful of that responsibility, that the Holocaust is not only, in some degree about us, but, does the Holocaust make us bitter? Does it increase our feelings of victimhood? Or does it, are we able to get past that and realize that a community that suffered as we have has a particular insight and something else to give the world, which is how we see it. And we are very much focused on, or we try to focus the Jewish world's attention not only on Holocaust, on Auschwitz. We like to say that, it's not Auschwitz period, which traditionally has been in Poland for a long time. It's Auschwitz, comma. And many of us are sticklers for grammar, and there's a big difference between Auschwitz period and Auschwitz, comma. And it's in the Jewish people's interest, the Jewish world's interest as a people, to understand that we are so strong and resilient that we can thrive around the world, and even in Krakow, organically, with Jews and non-Jews working together to rebuild Jewish life, and now helping Ukrainians. With the Israelis, there's a ton of Israeli tourism. A lot. If you go to a mall in Poland, you generally hear them speaking, half of the people in the mall are speaking Hebrew. That's it's much cheaper in Poland than Israel, much cheaper anywhere than Israel, but Poland's particularly cheap for Israelis. So you have a lot of Israelis back and forth, not only Holocaust tourism, which it used to be, but now just the sort of normalizing of, as Poland becomes, we move away from the Holocaust, and Poland becomes I won't say another country in the EU, because the Holocaust is always there, but Poland becomes more normal. Let's say that there are a lot of Israelis. Now we're seeing Israelis that had a difficult time getting back to Israel. We are seeing Israelis primarily with children that are afraid to go back to Israel. And now, although it breaks your heart, breaks my heart to say it as an Israeli citizen, that we're getting a lot of inquiries, social media, dozens of emails a week asking about Poland and life in Poland, that Israelis are looking to relocate to Poland, which is, I guess, shouldn't be surprising if we think that there are 50,000 or so Israelis in Berlin. Then, one of our strengths as a people is the fact that we are able to look at the big picture and not only say a place like Germany or Poland should be crossed off the list of places to inhabit because of the difficult recent history there.
Wow, Jonathan, thank you so much for the update. One of the things that completely astonished me and excited me and inspired me when I visited, both times that I visited, is learning about people who come to the Krakow JCC who didn't know that they were Jewish, or that they had some sort of Jewish connection, and somewhere in their, not just neshama were they feeling that, but then they found out something in their own family history, that they actually were either Jewish or Jewish adjacent. I'm wondering if there's a story of that you could share with us, whether it's from someone who you came to know who's Polish, or maybe someone who came from Ukraine, and then suddenly they're starting to explore their own Jewish identity and trying to get a sense of who they are and what is Jewish community, and how the JCC makes that possible.
Sure. So I think what's interesting on a macro level with the Ukrainians is that, for the most part, the non-Jewish Ukrainians want to go back to Ukraine. They are waiting because their husbands, sons, fathers, partners, friends, family are in Ukraine. Men between 18 and 60 are still 20 months later, 20 months since the outbreak of the war, or this stage of the war, as the Ukrainians say, are not allowed to leave. So men can't leave the country. So you have this static population of women and children that are waiting to go back till it's safe. But the Jews want to stay in Poland, which fascinates me. We have about 200 new Jewish Ukrainian families in Krakow, which is a big number for our community. We're still a tiny community. And just to see the divergence, that the non-Jews the non-Jews want to go back, and the Jews, I guess, comes from our history. They realize that that we're not as tied to places in the diaspora as others, and we have a history of being able to move, and they understand that they're being welcomed into a Jewish community or a Jewish world that always welcomes the stranger, certainly at least with Jews, and hopefully with others. So that's been interesting. In terms of a story of some people finding out they're Jewish, there were two sisters who a few years ago in their early 20s found out that they were Jewish. The father had left the family, and the father was Jewish, so they didn't want to have anything to do with the father's family and didn't know too much about the background because he'd left. And they found out that he actually was Jewish. One of the sisters got very involved with the Jewish community. They're about a year and a half apart in age. The other sister, not too interested. They were both, I guess, nominally Catholic, as almost everyone is on some level in Poland, but they weren't really going to church or felt very religious. So it wasn't a religious thing keeping the other sister from getting involved. She just didn't really see the allure. And the older sister brought the younger sister to a Hanukkah party at the JCC after a few years of her involvement. And she met a JCC employee that happened to be Jewish, and they became a couple. She became a lot more interested in her Jewish roots. They actually had the chuppah in the courtyard in front of the building. And their daughter is the youngest youngest kid in the preschool, which is the first Jewish preschool since the Holocaust. And I hope I didn't smile too much giving it away, but that's my wife's story, who I met in the JCC, and our daughter Ayala is the youngest girl in the preschool. So it's very personal for me as well as professional.
You've done some pretty amazing things in your time in Poland, but your daughter is hands down the most amazing. Jonathan, we're so grateful that we have the opportunity to support you through Kavod. Maybe we could conclude with a couple of things that you're working on that you really feel you need additional support for, or maybe a project that has emerged in response to the war in Israel, or something with the ongoing conflict with Ukraine and Russia that you really feel like Kavod donors need to know about.
Sure. I mean, it's just become a lot more difficult, as you would imagine. So we're probably doing half as much as we were doing at the high point, but donations are down 90%, just as the world has moved on. We ignored a lot of our regular fundraising during the Ukraine process. Our preschool really needs support. We have now 6 Israeli children that can't get back to, or the parent families are afraid to go back. So we're in the process of setting up a dedicated Hebrew-speaking part of our preschool, and need to hire somebody there and need to expand. So I would say that at this point, that our children are, as everywhere, are the future. And that's something that we're focused on and hoping to find support for additional funding for our preschool.
Thank you so much. I didn't make it to Poland until I was already in my 50s. And I was I had a lot of trepidation about the trip. And part of me was really not anxious, but somewhat kind of dreading it. And I had such a meaningful experience. Absolutely love my time in Krakow, love my time at the JCC. The comma, I love that comment because you get to see Jewish life being reborn and flourishing in really powerful ways. Our time in Warsaw was really amazing. The newish museum there is extraordinary. So I really recommend that people go. And the bike ride, the only thing I'll recommend on the bike ride is A, do a little training. I didn't, and that was a mistake. B, make sure that you fit the bike to your body, because I was like hunched over the bike for 55 miles. And then I'm still looking for a lawyer, Jonathan, because I had chronic neck pain for like 4 months. But then I realized the only person I could blame was me. So anyway, Jonathan, thank you so much. And we're just so grateful to be able to partner with you and to work with you. And as things emerge and you have updates to share with us, Neil and I and the whole team will help to make sure that the Kavod community knows about it. We're going to conclude today with some study. And when we thought about who might be willing to share some words of Torah with us. So many of the board members of Kavod are, not all of the board members of Kavod, but many board members of Kavod are friends from our time at the Hebrew Union College. And all of us over the years since then, even if we weren't your student in Los Angeles, we've had the opportunity to study Torah with Rabbi David Ellenson, Morenu, our amazing teacher, Rabbeinu, our amazing rabbi, Chavirenu, our amazing friend. And Jackie Ellenson, Rabbi Jackie Ellenson and Rabbi David Ellenson have been on the board of Kavod for about 25 years. So we're grateful to you for being part of our beautiful work, and we're grateful to you for being our teacher. And thank you for sharing some Torah with us today. And just unmute yourself, David.
Thank you very, very much. I'm very, very appreciative to be here. Jonathan, thank you for all you were doing and for all your words. And certainly Ayala is one of the great, great gifts to the Jewish people. I could go here virtually with everyone on the call, Susan, Jay, Neil, Yoshi, Bob. So good to see all of you. And Danny, you were the teacher of all of us. So for that, I'm really very, very privileged to be here today. When Yoshi and Neil initially asked me to do this, I had really assumed I was going to teach something on tzedakah. That seemed to be the most appropriate topic for Kavod, but I feel like so many of you, my heart is so very, very heavy right now as I contemplate all the events of the last few weeks. We woke up on October 7th, as I know all of you did, to a feeling of astonishment. One of my very, very, very closest friends, some of you may know, I served for a while as director of the Schusterman Center for Israel Studies at Brandeis University, where Neil Gold was my student. So that was really a particular joy. But the man I succeeded, who had actually asked me to succeed him, was Ilan Troen. Ilan had been for many years head of the graduate school at Ben Gurion University, and then Yehuda Reinhardt's brought Ilan and Carol over to the United States, and Ilan really founded the Schusterman Center, and he is really one of the great scholars of Israel studies in the world. I woke up on Shabbat morning and immediately received a phone call that his daughter and son-in-law had been murdered at Kibbutz Cholit while they shielded their 16-year-old son, who miraculously survived. I presume it's a story known to many of you, and I know that all of us on this call, our hearts are broken as we consider the plight of our 1,500 Israeli sisters and brothers who were horribly murdered by Hamas on that day. Of course, in the weeks subsequent to that, we now have Israel responding to that event, and it is not my intention in the passage I'm about to teach to indicate what the military strategy or political strategy for Israel ought to be. I leave that to countless other commentators with more wisdom and insight into the situation than I possess. And I also acknowledge that there clearly is no easy solution to this problem. But as a result of all this, I decided to take one particular passage and its discussion, passage from Maimonides' Mishnah Torah, Hilchot Malachim, chapter 6, the 7th halacha, and to give you Rabbi Shlomo Goren's discussion of it. This is a halacha that I dealt with in an article about a year or two ago. It's in a book, Swimming Against the Current. It is entitled Rabbi Shlomo Goren and the Maimonidean Law of Siege. It was written in honor of my friend, Rabbi Chaim Seidler-Feller, and it deals with how Rabbi Goren, based on this passage in Hilchot Malachim, feels war ought to be conducted. I want to go through this passage with you, discuss very, very briefly. If any of you are genuinely interested in this, you can find the book, Swimming Against the Current, edited by Shaul Seidler-Feller and David Myers. And I can make my article available through Neil and Yoshi to all of you. But I just want to discuss aspects of it and then look very, very, very quickly at a passage from a discussion in 1938 between Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Buber. I suspect a number of you are familiar with this, but the key point that I want to make here is that self-defense is a Jewish value. The obligation that the Jewish people and its army have to defend the Jewish people is unquestionable, and certainly in a situation like this, the issue of how one conducts that war, though, is equally a matter of discussion in the tradition. I am sorry in terms of time that what I'll probably only be able to do is to present this text to you. This text screams out Darsheni Ke'ilu, as it were, Kivyachol, because it would be interesting, and maybe we'll have a minute, I don't know, I'll leave that up to Yoshi and Neil to discuss perhaps what some of the implications are. But with all of this said as a way of introduction, one last word. This was written in 1982 when the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, were engaged in a war with Hezbollah in northern Lebanon. I'm sure all of us remember that from 40 years ago. And the question that was put before Rabbi Goren, who had been the chief chaplain of the IDF of Sahel, was, is it permitted to close Beirut off from all four sides? That is to say, when you engage in a siege, what is it that Jewish law states about how war needs to be conducted from a Jewish perspective in an ethical manner in this situation? I do not want to assert that the situation in Gaza today is identical to that in Beirut 40 years ago, but certainly there are significant overlaps. And it's interesting to see then how it is that Rabbi Goren viewed this. Obviously, the leadership of the PLO at that time had taken refuge in Beirut, and probably many of you are aware that Rabbi Goren and the Israel Defense Forces did rule that there could be a path for escape, and it allowed some of the leadership of the PLO to flee from Beirut in that situation. Whether the situation today with Hamas is identical to that, I am not certain, but at least I thought that in light of what Neil said in the beginning, that it was important for us in Kavod to think, how is it that one acts with decency and integrity in light of the siege that is taking place now? How is it we would view this? So with all of that said, why don't you put the text up for me, Neil? And you can see the siege of Beirut in light of Jewish law. So this was an essay that he wrote on August 6, 1982. And I do want to indicate that there was a very famous rabbi, Shaul Yisraeli, who disagreed with the ruling that I'm about to cite in Rabbi Goren's name, namely Rabbi Yisraeli thought that the Maimonidean passage here did not apply to the siege on Beirut. But let me read the passage. K'shetzarin al ir l'tofsa, when a siege is placed around a city to conquer it, ein mekifin ota me'arba ruchoteha, Ela mishalosh ruchateha. So Maimonides rules you cannot surround the city on all four sides, but rather only on three. Umenichim makom laboreach l'chol misha yirtzeh lehimalet al nafsho. A place should be left for inhabitants to flee, and for all those who desire to escape with their lives, as it is written, and they besieged Midian as God had commanded Moses. And then according to the tradition in Sifrei, this passage in Numbers meant that when they besieged Midian, which was guilty of the worst atrocities against the Jewish people, nevertheless, a third side was left open. Now, the question then became for Rabbi Goren, was this a result of ethical concerns, or was it simply prudential or pragmatic? That is to say, if you gave people the option to flee from a siege that took place on all four sides, would it in fact weaken their military capacities so that they would flee, and therefore the armies of Israel would win? What is interesting here is that for Rabbi Goren, he rejects the notion that it is a tactical concern. In other words, for Rabbi Goren, the issue here is not whether in fact it will more easily lead to an Israeli or a Jewish military victory. And I do want to also be clear, and here you have a difference between the modern and pre-modern ages in Judaism. Maimonides is writing this when the Jewish people have absolutely no military strength. Today, these decisions are made, and these texts, if one wants to apply them, are made when we have the army of the Israel Defense Forces. And thus, one might claim that these sources may not be as informative or as guiding as perhaps they might have been in a pre-modern period. But in any event, we have this here, and what's most interesting is that Rabbi Goren does maintain, and I discussed this at great length, that the notion here is that it is an ethical concern, a humanistic concern on the part of the tradition, namely that initially peace has to always be offered to an enemy, because peace, according to Rabbi Goren and according to many, many traditional midrashim, is the greatest of all Jewish values, but that in addition, humanistically, an opportunity should be given even to one's sworn enemies to have the opportunity to save their lives. And thus, Rabbi Goren writes, when the soldiers of the Jewish army besiege a city to capture it, they do not surround it on all four sides, but rather on three. They leave such room that any person who wishes to save his life can flee. And thus, according to the tradition, God commanded Moses to conduct the siege by encircling the enemy from three sides. And then, quoting the Sifrei in Parshat Matot, for the Torah demonstrates compassion even towards Israel's enemies, not to kill them, but rather to allow them to flee for their lives. Now, you can go up to the next page, Neil. I do want to point out, it is interesting that the very next year, when the PLO had its forces in Tripoli and a war was waged against them, that the Israeli army did participate, or the Navy, in a military blockade of Tripoli, which gave the PLO leaders in that instance, just a year later, no opportunity to escape. And Rabbi Goren did approve the Israeli Navy blockading the fourth side so that no Palestinian leaders could escape. So it becomes really interesting in this sense, what one might perceive to be the inconsistency of Rabbi Goren in these two instances. But again, because of time constraints, I'll leave it to later. Here, Goren does say the purpose is a war of defense of Israel against an enemy. It is a milchemet chovah, not a milchemet reshut. It's not an optional war. This is an obligatory war on the part of the Jewish people, and therefore he asked the question, in an instance such as this, perhaps the law of siege as prescribed by the tradition don't apply. and therefore the army would be obligated to sweep out the evil from your midst. Because if you do not dispossess the inhabitants of the land, those whom you allow to remain shall be stings in your eyes and thorns in your sides, and they shall harass you in the land in which you live. Quite clearly, if we were to deal with an analogy here, this becomes the rationale for many, as they assert that the Israeli government in this instance and has no option other than to use its defense forces to completely obliterate, if that were possible, the armies of Hamas. And go on down to the next part of the page. Rabbi Goren then observes that the war with Midian was not a war of conquest, but he observes that it was really a war of nakama, revenge against the enemies of Israel. And God indeed spoke to Moses saying, assail the Midianites and defeat them, for they assailed you by the trickery they practiced against you. So that this becomes, as it were, a holy war of vengeance. And thus Moses spoke to the people saying, let persons be picked out among you for a campaign, and let them fall upon Midian to wreak the Lord's vengeance on Midian. As if noting the switch from avenge the Israelite people to God's command to wreak the Lord's vengeance in Moses' instruction, the Sifrei states, and this is what Rabbi Goren quotes, you are not engaging in an act of vengeance for the sake of flesh and blood. Rather, you are avenging God, the one who spoke, Misha Mar v'haya ha'olam. And Rashi says, for when one stands against Israel, it is as if one stands against the Holy One who is blessed. And Rabbi Yisraeli wanted to make the point that this was the case in the war in Beirut. Nevertheless, Rabbi Goren then held that it was unquestionably an ethical demand of the tradition to only hold a siege on three sides, and that cannot be compromised, he said. He said it is certain that the conditions that the sieges imposed on the city and its inhabitants can be severe. Jewish ethics permit that. Goren held that a Jewish army had a license to prevent the besieged from receiving military reinforcement. And in light of all we're reading now, Goren felt that the Israeli military had the right that could prevent any activities that would break or ease the siege, allowing supplies of food, water, ammunition. He doesn't mention fuel, but in light of our current situation, we might. In sum, the obligation to leave one side open during a siege allows for the possibility of movement in one direction only, from the place under siege and not into the city, not into the area of siege. As I read Rabbi Goren, who is much, much, much to the left of Rabbi Yisraeli, even he would not necessarily assert that the Israeli Defense Forces are wrong in not allowing aid to come into Gaza in this situation. I'm not certain he would say that, but it's at least one logical outcome of his teaching. And now let's just go to the last page, Neil. And thus, just one more little bit, he says in the end, I stand firmly by my previous position. There's no shadow of a doubt that Jewish law, as described by all the authorities, regards the obligation to leave a fourth side open during a siege, to allow the enemy the option to flee for his life. It was applicable in Operation Peace for Galilee in Lebanon. And it is forbidden to seal off a place of siege hermetically on all four sides. So with this, I want to just finish with a final thought. And again, I'm really sorry we don't have more time. In an exchange between Gandhi and Buber in 1938, Gandhi said the Jews of Germany should employ soul force as an appropriate form of nonviolent resistance to Nazi persecution of the Jews. And Buber, who of course did not even believe necessarily in the creation of a Jewish state and wanted a land of two peoples, he rejected this suggestion and contended that Gandhi simply did not grasp the enormity of the evil the Nazis embodied. He said, while Jews do not want to use force, he wrote, We believe that sometimes a man must use force to save himself, or even more, his or her children. Buber taught that Judaism does not abjure force to combat wrong. He argued that force must remain available as a live moral option to combat evil in a world where aggression against the innocent exists. Its use may be the only just course a community or nation can adopt while confronted by radical evil. The obligation of the Israel Defense Forces to defend the people of Israel is absolute from the standpoint of Jewish tradition. But he concludes by saying, I cannot help withstanding evil when I see that it is about to destroy the good. I am forced to withstand the evil in the world, just as the evil within myself. I can only strive not to have to do so by force. But if there is no other way of preventing the evil destroying the good, I trust I shall use force and give myself into God's hands. Quite clearly, and you can put us back on the big screen, Neil. As Buber would put it, we always walk along a narrow ridge, and my only prayer at this moment is that as Israel enters this next stage in the campaign, that the wisdom that Buber espouses here, that only the amount of force necessary to achieve its political and military aim to secure the safety for its citizens will be used, and that innocent life, as much as possible, can somehow be spared. L'man achai v'ra'ai adabrana shalom bach, for the sake of our brothers and sisters, Jewish and non-Jewish, I seek your peace. Adonai Ozli Amo Yitain, Adonai Yivarech, et Amo v'chol ha'amim v'shalom. May God bless the people Israel with strength and all peoples with peace, particularly at this time of such horror. Amen.
Amen.
Amen is right.
Thank you
That's
so
right.
much, David. I'm so grateful to you for your words of Torah. And thank you, Sydney, for the opening meditation. And thank you, Jonathan, for your time. And Neil, I wanted to give you the last word. You really were the person who thought up this wonderful series. And in fact, a little bit embarrassed to say, reminded me that Kavod had a 30th birthday coming up. Because while I was present when it all happened, I hadn't really put it together in my mind that it had been 30 years already, which is pretty amazing. So thank you for putting this great series together. We're going to make the recordings available on the Kavod website. So if you know people who you think would really enjoy hearing the conversation that we had with Beth, the conversation that we had with Edgar, Danny Siegel's teaching, so many wonderful, wonderful opportunities to learn about the work of Kavod. Please, please, please share it widely and broadly. And Neil, I wanted to give you a chance to close this wonderful series together.
Well, and thanks to you too, Yosh. I mean, first of all, you're an inspiration to all of us to say, as we're watching this awful moment unfold, you got up off your tuchus and said, I have to be in Israel with our people and do the work of tzedakah there. Also, 30 years ago, you invited me to be involved in this amazing endeavor, and I'm really grateful to you for so much, Yoshi. I'm thinking, and my thanks to everybody, everyone who's joined us, everyone who's participated, everyone who's supported Kavod, certainly to Rabbi David Ellenson for his extraordinary teaching today and the role model that he has been of Torah, but also of menschlichkeit and kindness and compassion. I'm thinking of two Torah texts. One is from Pirkei Avot that says, Marbeh tzedakah, marbeh shalom, that the more tzedakah work that we're involved in, the more shalom comes into the world. I don't think the work of tzedakah is going to quash Hamas. I don't think it's going to end the war, and I don't think it's going to end terrorism and stuff like that. I do think it brings shalom into the world because of the amount of kindness and compassion and human dignity that's restoring to people who are suffering. So that's the way I'm thinking about that text today. And I'm thinking about the text at the end of Masechet Ta'anit in the Talmud, which asserts that those who mourn with Jerusalem at a time of mourning will get in the future the merit in the future the opportunity to rejoice with her when there's a time of rejoicing again. Someday that time of rejoicing will return to us, God willing. It should be soon. In the meantime, during these difficult times, it's such a privilege to be involved in the work of tzedakah and doing mitzvahs and the work of Tikkun Olam. Yoshi, you gave us the opportunity to do all of that, so I'm really, really grateful to you. And thanks to everybody for being here today and for these all three parts of this session. We'll follow up with all of you and with prayers for peace and for wholeness and for world repair. That's what we do together. I guess the perfect final words are the words of the Rabbani Kapach, who said, Yoshi and I say this to each other all the time, Nizkel mitzvot, that we should merit the opportunity to do many, many mitzvot together into the future. Thanks, everybody. Great to see you all.
Thanks, everyone. Really grateful to everybody for joining and wish you all the very best. Go to kavod.org if you want to make a donation right now for emergency relief.
Bye.
Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you for the beautiful teachings.